All right. Hello and welcome to our live virtual forum tonight with California's 33rd Congressional District. We just have a few folks on right now, but we are dialing out to tens of thousands of residents in California's 33rd Congressional District for this live virtual forum. Tonight we'll be discussing the Inflation Reduction Act and its climate and healthcare provisions. We'll be joined in a moment by your Congressman, Ted Lieu, and he's joined by Secretary Wade Crowfoot, California's Natural Resources Secretary. So if you have a question about the Inflation Reduction Act and its climate and healthcare provisions, please press 0 on your phone to get that question to an operator. They'll put you in line to ask your question live, but if you're not comfortable going live, just let your operator know that, and if you prefer that I read your question instead, I'm happy to do that. So again, if you have a question to submit for our live forum at any time, press 0, get that question to an operator, and then we're happy to take you live. But if you're not comfortable going live, just let your operator know if you want me to read your question. And again, happy to do that. Whatever's more comfortable for you is fine with us. And if you'd like to get email updates from the Congressman's office on the issues that affect you in the 33rd Congressional District, please press 7 to get that email to an operator, and we'll keep you updated on the issues that affect you moving forward. We'll also run some survey questions tonight that you can vote on using your phone. Stay tuned for those. And even if you don't have questions of your own tonight, we do appreciate your feedback through those surveys. So thank you again for anybody who can stick around, vote in surveys. And if you do have a question for either Congressman Lieu or California's Natural Resources Secretary Wade Crowfoot, press 0 at any time to get that question to an operator. I'm going to go through this introduction one more time, then we'll turn it over to your Congressman to get started. Again, hello and welcome to tonight's live forum with Congressman Ted Lieu. He represents you in California's 33rd Congressional District. Tonight we'll be discussing the Inflation Reduction Act and its climate and healthcare provisions. We'll be joined in a moment by your Congressman Ted Lieu, and he is joined by Secretary Wade Crowfoot, California's Natural Resources Secretary. So if you have a question about the Inflation Reduction Act and its climate and healthcare provisions for either of our guests tonight, please press 0, get that question to an operator. They'll put you in line to ask your question live, but if you're not comfortable going live, just let your operator know, and I'm happy to read your question instead. Again, 0 to submit a question for Q&A, and we will spend most of our forum on Q&A. We'll hear from Congressman Lieu and Secretary Crowfoot in just a moment, but as soon as we get through those quick introductions, we're going to spend the remainder of this forum on Q&A. It'll be most of our time tonight. So thank you to those of you who are already submitting questions. If you haven't gotten an operator with you yet and you've pressed 0, just give it a couple of minutes. We'll have somebody with you to take down your question. And again, you can ask your question live, or you can let your operator know if you want me to read it over the air instead. And once more, if you'd like to get email updates from your congressman in the future, you can press 7, get your best email address to an operator. They'll take that down. We'll make sure to keep you updated on these sorts of issues in the future electronically. And we will again run some survey questions tonight that you can vote on using your phone. So even if you don't have a question of your own, we'd really appreciate that feedback, and it's a good way to give us your feedback even if you don't have a question you'd like to ask in the forum. So once more, 0 to ask a question live, 7 if you'd like to submit your email address to get email updates from your Congressman, Ted Lieu. Stick around to vote in our survey questions. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to your Congressman representing you in the 33rd District of California, Ted Lieu. Go ahead, please, Congressman.
Thank you so much for all of you who are participating. I want to give you an update about legislation in Washington, D.C., and in particular, the Inflation Reduction Act. Look forward to answering any questions you may have, and we're so honored to have a special guest with us today, Secretary Wade Crowfoot, who is the California's Natural Resources Secretary. So let me first give the update on legislation. If you look at what we've done in Congress, it's clear that Democrats have been putting people over politics. We passed the American Rescue Plan early on, and that law helped get our economy back on track. It got vaccines into people's arms. It helped schools open and remain open, and it helped create over 8.3 million jobs in the first 15 months of the Biden presidency, the most in U.S. history. We then followed that up with the infrastructure law that rebuilds roads, bridges, and highways. It's going to take lead out of our drinking water and put broadband everywhere from rural areas to inner cities. We then passed the PACT Act, which helps veterans nationwide who suffered diseases and other health conditions from burn pits, and it's really going to change their lives. We also then passed the CHIPS Act, which is going to bring back manufacturing of highly sophisticated chips for both our national security as well as for cars and other consumer products. And then most recently, we passed into law the Inflation Reduction Act that is going to have for the first time prescription drugs being negotiated by Medicare. It's going to have healthcare subsidies, and it's going to have the largest investment in climate change projects in U.S. history. So it is a legislative record that has been extremely productive this term in Congress, and we have a president that understands how we need to help the American people. So very pleased to be able to answer any questions you may have about these significant laws. And with us today, we have Secretary Wade Crowfoot. He is California's Natural Resources Secretary, appointed in January 2019 by Governor Gavin Newsom. Secretary Crowfoot oversees an agency of 21,000 employees who protect and manage California's natural environment. And as a member of the governor's cabinet, he advises Governor Newsom on natural resources and environmental issues. Prior to serving as secretary, Wade Crowfoot led the Water Foundation, a nonprofit philanthropy that builds shared water solutions across the America West. Before that, Secretary Crowfoot served in Governor Jerry Brown's administration as the Deputy Cabinet Secretary and Senior Advisor to the Governor. I've had the opportunity to know Secretary Crowfoot when he worked for Governor Jerry Brown when I was in the state legislature. Wade Crowfoot also previously served as West Coast Regional Director for the Environmental Defense Fund, and he received a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1996 and a master's degree in public policy from the London School of Economics in 2004. So with that, we'd love to hear some remarks from Secretary Crowfoot, and we'd love to take any questions any of you may have.
Well, thanks, Congressman, and I hope everyone's doing well and staying safe amidst this worsening heat wave that we're experiencing. You know, we're talking tonight about some really exciting news coming out of the federal government on climate change. And, you know, as we talk about climate change, I'm reminded of that old Charles Dickens quote, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." You know, in the ledger of our challenges regarding climate change, California is very much on the front lines of climate change and its impacts. I don't have to tell you that. You know, as we speak, we're heading into a weekend where we will likely experience record-breaking temperatures. Where I'm at up in around Sacramento, we may reach 115 degrees. And you know this because down in greater Los Angeles, peaked over 120 degrees in the last couple of years. Active wildfires as we meet tonight in the Castaic area north of Los Angeles and on the border of Mexico to the south of Los Angeles, catastrophic wildfire, an increasing problem. And then, of course, our worsening drought. Hotter climate, hotter temperatures mean that the droughts that we experience are more punishing, and we're certainly experiencing that. So that's obviously huge challenges. But tonight I'm energized because we are seeing leadership out of Washington, D.C. on climate that we haven't seen in a generation. The Congress and the President's administration collectively passed the infrastructure bill earlier this year, which was an important down payment on a lot of infrastructure modernization that benefits the environment. But I have to say this Inflation Reduction Act might as well be called the Climate Hope Act because it is providing a level of investment, almost $400 billion in making the transition we know we need to make to both reduce carbon pollution and adapt to climate change. And I have to say, you know, working at the state level, I'm so proud that our legislature, our governor, just last night or this week have finalized a budget for our state. And over the last 2 years, our state has invested $54 billion in climate change or in actions to both reduce carbon pollution and to protect our communities and natural places from climate change. So you hopefully know that your legislators in Congress, like Congressman Lieu, your state legislators are driving hard on climate change. But really before the Inflation Reduction Act, we didn't have major federal investment in making the transition to clean energy and to clean transportation, phasing out extraction of fossil fuels, doing so in a way that maintains energy reliability and affordability and grows prosperity. And so now I'll say as the climate continues to destabilize as a result of climate change, we've got a strong fighting chance across our country to lead the world, demonstrating what we need to get done. And I think that our nation has a good fighting chance to reach its ambitious target that the president set earlier this administration to reduce our carbon pollution by 40% by 2030. So, Congressman, I actually think this combination of federal programs and funding and state programs and funding is going to let us move further and faster in California to combat climate change and protect ourselves from its impacts in a way, frankly, that provides a model to the rest of the world, showing that California, the fifth largest economy on the planet, can actually make this transition and protect its residents as it does that. So glad to be here tonight, Congressman, and I know we're looking forward to hearing comments and receiving questions from constituents.
Yeah, and thank you both for being here with us tonight.
Colquitt.
Appreciate you both joining us. Thank you so much. And for our live audience out there, if you joined us after the beginning of the forum, I'll let you know here that if you're already waiting in line to submit a question, thank you so much. We'll be taking Q&A for the rest of this live forum. And thank you for those of you who have already submitted questions. If you want to get email updates from Congressman Lieu, you can press 7 on your phone. We're also going to run some surveys, so hang tight for those. But let's go ahead and jump right into Q&A. We've got Karen in Redondo Beach asking a question right now. Karen, welcome. You're on live with Congressman Lieu and Secretary Crowfoot. Go ahead, please.
Great, thank you. I'd like to know what's the most impactful part for Middle America with the Inflation Reduction Act, because now that that's been passed and now that college debt is being canceled, I'm afraid that our government is now choosing winners and losers in our economy. So because Middle America, I want to know how they're going to be impacted, because in that college debt that was canceled, there was no provisions for blue-collar vocational workers. And that confused me, since I know, Congressman Lieu, it's important to you to take care of Middle America. How could you address that for me, please?
Thank you so much for your question. So the Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of great provisions. Three of the main ones are it has Medicare negotiate prescription drug prices. So the high cost of prescription drugs affects everyone, whether you are in Nebraska or you're in Torrance or you're in Orlando, Florida, right? So that is a pretty big piece of the Inflation Reduction Act. Another major provision is it has healthcare subsidies so that people's healthcare premiums don't spike, and that's for anyone across America who is on the Affordable Care Act. In addition, it has this significant investment of climate change funding. So, for example, it's going to invest $27 billion in nonprofit state and local climate finance institutions that support the rapid deployment of low and zero emission technologies, including solar. And people use solar all across America, whether you're in Ohio or Oregon or New York. It also invests more than $15 billion in multiple loan and grant programs at the Department of Energy to support the development of innovative technologies and American manufacturing of zero-emission transportation technologies. So manufacturing is one of the things that the Democratic Congress has worked hard on. This Inflation Reduction Act has money for American manufacturing. The CHIPS Act that I talked about earlier has a massive amount of manufacturing for chips. And so you see companies like Intel building facilities in Ohio and in other places. So there's a lot in this legislation that helps everyone across America, including people in Southern California.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Appreciate you taking that on for Karen, and thank you, Karen, for being a part of our forum. Let's jump right to our next question coming to us from Donna. Hey, Donna. Thanks for being with us on the forum. Go ahead with your question.
I'm concerned about two things. Number one, I'm on the west side of LA, and my apartment's over 100 degrees right now, and I'm in an older building, so I have a wall unit in my bedroom, where I am at right now. But the heat has been horrible, and we hear that we may have rolling blackouts. And I don't know if there's like backup generators or, I mean, what do people do to prevent heat stroke or dying? I mean, the heat is unbelievable, and I can't believe they're talking about turning off the energy of too many people. Turn it on. So that's the first question, if you want to answer that, and then I have one other.
Why don't we have Secretary Crowfoot talk a little bit about that issue from the state level, because the state has a lot of jurisdiction over energy and other issues related to how people get their power. So, Secretary Crowfoot, do you want to take a crack at that?
Across the West, the periods of peak energy use when people are using their electricity is during the hottest periods of the day in the summertime, because everyone's running their air condition, right? You live in a building that's 100 degrees. You're not going to be able to stay in your indoor space unless you have air condition. And what we've seen with the acceleration of climate change is worse and worse extreme heat over larger areas of the Southwest. So some scientists call it a heat dome that we really haven't experienced before, because we see these record-breaking temperatures across multiple states. And what that does is it stresses our electricity grid, because it demands essentially all the supplies of electricity that we have. So over the last couple of years in Sacramento, our agencies and our state leaders have been focused intensely on increasing energy supplies for these peak demand periods. And just in the last year or two, we brought on a bunch of new energy supplies measured in thousands of megawatts to address this, help make sure that in super hot periods like what we're experiencing right now, we have enough energy. At the same time, we're seeing worse and worse heat waves. So we're in a bit of a race with climate change that's on the march. Our goal right now, so you know, is to ensure that we have reliable energy through this heat wave, through this summer and fall. And that's why our energy agencies are issuing what's called flex alerts. So those people that can turn down their electricity use do. And we're taking extraordinary action from military installations to office buildings to campuses to shift our energy load to maintain energy reliability. We know it's essential, because at the end of the day, people are relying on air condition right now. Lastly, I'll say that here in Sacramento last night, our legislature, our governor, agreed on additional actions to actually expand energy during these peak periods. So it's our clear priority to keep the lights on, to keep the air condition, working during these periods, and we're very focused on doing so.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. And Donna's second question, I'm just going to read it so that we can get to more questions. We've got a lot of folks waiting. Donna's asking, what's being done to make sure water comes out of our taps next year? Is there going to be enough water for the entire state? Can you take that on, please, for us, Representative or Secretary Crowfoot?
I'm glad to do that, if it's helpful, Congressman.
Yes, Secretary Crowfoot is an expert in water, so go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and I'll also say that my colleague Andrea reminded me that there are 9 cooling centers open now around Los Angeles, and these are recreation centers and cooling centers. I should say senior centers. LA residents can call 311, which is the non-emergency information line. Just go on your phone and dial 311. You'll get an operator, and they'll tell you where the nearest cooling center is. So while we're focused on ensuring that everybody who has air conditioning in their home can remain in their home, obviously those who don't, who need to access a cooling center, can do so by dialing 311. Now, let me just
actually add to that real quick. So there are cities outside of LA that also have those cooling centers. So my wife and I live in Torrance, and Torrance, for example, has one as well. And so you should check with your city if you don't live in LA, because they may also have a cooling center. But go ahead.
Really good point. Thanks so much for that, Congressman. So on the topic of water, as you know, California experiences drought, and sometimes we experience flooding. It's just part of our natural environment. However, increasingly, our droughts have become more punishing and more severe. And we've experienced this now with the current drought. We're experiencing our third year of drought, and it looks like, at least from some projections, that we may very well move into next year experiencing our fourth year of drought. And that happened only a few years after a major drought between 2012 and 2016. And something we're experiencing now with these droughts is hotter temperatures in the winter, which are reducing our snowpack in the mountains that provide, frankly, a lot of our water supply in Southern California. And we're also experiencing that more of that snowpack that does fall is being absorbed into very dry soils or evaporating into warmer air as temperatures heat up. So we have a real challenge. We estimate that by 2040, we're going to lose about 10% of our water supply due to these hotter temperatures. So we're going to still experience dry times and wet times, but overall about 10% reduction. So we're very clear, and Governor Newsom is very clear, working with our congressional delegation, including Congressman Lieu, that we need to invest in more infrastructure to capture the water when it comes and when it falls in the winter. So we need more stormwater capture across our cities to actually capture that water underground and recharge our groundwater basins. We need to recharge groundwater across our state in agricultural areas so that agriculture uses less of our surface water. We need to expand recycled water projects. And across greater LA and the 88 cities within the county, you're doing that. You're leading the way. Your leaders are leading the way on water recycling. We need to double down on desalination, which is using ocean water for this. And in order to make these projects happen, state leaders have invested almost $8 billion over the last 2 years in state funding, your taxpayer dollars, getting into local water agencies for these projects. I'm so excited that the Inflation Reduction Act, which is this, a bill that just passed in the Congress that we're talking about here tonight, has additional funding for everything from water recycling to improved water conservation to stormwater capture. So it's this generational federal funding and state funding that's going to power the projects in your communities and across Southern California that are going to ensure that as things get hotter and as they get drier over periods, we're going to continue to be able to thrive in California. I mean, I am optimistic. I've spent a lot of my career working on water. I'm optimistic that we can continue to protect our way of life in California, but we have to adjust. We have to modernize our infrastructure to adjust to this new climate normal.
Thank you so much.
Excellent answers. Thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate you both again, and thank you for the questions from Donna. We're going to get right to Luis's question in a moment here, but first we've got a quick survey question. We'll run a few of these, and you can vote on your phone. When it comes to tackling the climate crisis, what issue area most concerns you? Press 1 if it's pollution reduction. Press 2 if it's environmental justice, and press 3 if it's energy costs. So again, when it comes to tackling the climate crisis, what issue area most concerns you? Press 1 for pollution reduction, 2 for environmental justice, and 3 for energy costs. Go ahead and vote on that now. We'll have a couple more coming up. A reminder, you can press 7 to get email updates from your congressman. And we're going to go to Luis's question next. She's asked me to read this. She says, as far as EV and going electric for all transportation, how will California address the overload and usage on the electric grid if everyone is charging their cars and ensure that none of it is coming from a fossil fuel source and is instead coming from a green source? Congressman, that one comes from Luis.
So I'll answer that, and then I'll give Secretary Cofer an opportunity to answer the question as well. The Inflation Reduction Act has nearly $3 billion for electrical transmission. So it's going to help create a 21st century energy grid capable of having electric vehicles across America as well as in California. In addition, it's going to also help us get EV vehicles and other alternative fuel vehicles for heavy-duty vehicles. So the Inflation Reduction invests $1 billion in replacing certain heavy-duty vehicles, such as certain trucks and school buses, with zero-emission vehicles through a new grant program at the EPA. Now, in terms of how California is looking at the electrical grid issue, I'll throw that to Secretary Crowford for him to answer.
Yeah, thanks. So basically, what we need to do is electrify our transportation sector with, these these plug-in vehicles that obviously are getting more and more popular. And in fact, right now, demand for these zero-emission vehicles is outstripping supply. In the last quarter, I think 16% of new vehicle sales in California were all electric, which is about 1 out of every 5 vehicles. So we're seeing this transition happen. But it's an excellent question, which is, one, how do we ensure that there's enough electricity to power all of these vehicles? And then how do we ensure that the electricity that's powering them is 100% clean? So this will require us to continue to vastly expand our solar and wind energy across the state, as well as our geothermal energy, which is non-polluting use of the warmth under the earth, as well as our battery storage. And we're driving some really ambitious stuff, including offshore wind in certain parts of the state, very far offshore, to produce this clean energy. Right now, this year, about 2/3 of the electricity that we produce across the state comes from carbon-free sources. Pretty remarkable. 5th largest economy in the world, and about 2/3 of our electricity comes from clean sources. But we need to move that to 100. So we have very clear targets and major investments across the state, which again are going to be powered by this federal funding enabled by the Inflation Reduction Act. So we're going to expand clean energy and make sure, and while we're bringing offline fossil fuel energy like natural gas plants, the remainder of any coal-fired power plants. And so we will have a 100% clean energy grid at a scale that will power electric vehicles. I'll also say, and lastly say, that vehicles actually can also serve as batteries that provide energy back into the grid. So you think about your car battery, it powers your car, but when it's sitting in your garage, it can actually earn money by pushing electrons back onto the energy grid. It's actually not science fiction. This is technology that we are essentially enabling across California. So in 10 years' time, someone will be able to charge their battery, drive around town, and then when they come back and at certain times, their battery, if they want to, can provide electrons back into the grid. So it will help balance out that 100% clean energy grid. And we're really excited about this and proud that California is on the forefront of all of these topics.
I also want to add that the Inflation Reduction Act has money for innovation, and we're seeing some amazing innovation in technology in terms of energy storage. So in my district, the Beverly Hills Hilton later this year is basically going to have a groundbreaking where they're going to be powered by this technology known as an ice brick. So it turns out that water is actually capable of storing energy, and so this system is based on water storage, and it's going to have these cells called ice bricks. That's going to be essentially energy that will be discharged during peak hours and when it's hot. And so that is some very interesting technology that's going to go online later this year. And then there's another company that is working on technology of basically having sand, which also stores energy, basically having that be used as a form of battery. And so we're seeing some very interesting technology happen, and I look forward to working in the state of California as well as we look at these alternative forms of technology.
Thanks again. Appreciate that, Congressman Lieu. Thank you again, Secretary Crowfoot, and thanks so much for that last question from Luis. We're going to get the results from our last poll. Then we've got Janet, Court, and Mike in line. So thanks to those of you who are in line with questions. A reminder, you can press 0 to submit a question for Q&A. You can press 7 to get email updates from your congressman. We're at about the halfway point in our forum, so I'm going to take a quick moment for anybody who needs to reach out to the congressman's office for constituent assistance and you'd rather not submit a question in this forum, especially if it's private or personal. You can reach out to his office, Los Angeles office at 323-651-1040. Again, 323-651-1040, or go to his website at lieu.house.gov. All right, let's get this next question in. After our poll results, we asked you, when it comes to tackling the climate crisis, what issue area most concerns you? 41% of you said pollution reduction, 31% said environmental justice, and 29% said energy costs. So thank you so much for voting in that poll. We've got a couple more up next. Let's get to Janet in Beverly Hills, who asks, what does the Inflation Reduction Act do to deal with the air quality problems that are getting increasingly worse as the year goes on? Congressman, that one is from Janet.
So the Inflation Reduction Act doesn't just have money to address climate change. It also makes some significant policy changes. You may have remembered that the Supreme Court earlier this year had this awful decision where they basically kneecapped the EPA and said, hey, carbon is not a pollutant, so you can't really regulate it. Well, the Inflation Reduction Act basically reverses that Supreme Court decision, and we, in fact, say, yes, you, EPA, can't regulate this, and we're saying carbon is a pollutant. So there's a whole host of provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act that are not just investments, but also policy changes that will make sure that we have cleaner air, better water, as well as money to address climate change.
And Congressman, I would just add, you referenced all of this investment in transitioning to cleaner transportation. Right now, a good portion of the pollution in Southern California, as well as our, greenhouse gas emissions, comes from transportation. That's the cars, the conventional cars that we drive, even though they were cleaner than they were 25, 30 years ago, they're still polluting. And then the trucks, the Port of LA and Long Beach is really, really important for our economy and goods movement. And a lot of the, products that roll out of Greater Los Angeles, or do so on heavy duty vehicles that pollute. And so the Inflation Reduction Act, as the Congressman said, provides incentives to make that transition for those vehicles. So it's both investments in, cleaner energy creation, again, that solar, that wind power, but then also in transitioning our vehicles across the state that will clean up the air. Won't do so tomorrow, but it will do so here in coming years. And that's a point that really makes me optimistic.
All right. Thank you so much again. Appreciate the answers. Thank you, Janet in Beverly Hills, for that question. We're going to go to our second poll question now. The question for you is, what provision of the Inflation Reduction Act that focuses on cutting energy costs most excites you? Press 1 if it's direct consumer rebates for energy efficient and electric appliances. Press 2 if it's rooftop solar panels tax credits. Press 3 if it's electric vehicle tax credits for new and used electric vehicle purchases. So again, our question is, what provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act that focuses on cutting energy costs most excites you? Press 1 if it's direct consumer rebates for energy efficient and electric appliances. Press 2 if it's rooftop solar panel tax credits, and press 3 if it's electric vehicle tax credits for new and used electric vehicle purchases. Go ahead and vote now. We'll have the results for that in a moment. I did announce we were going to take you, Court, but we're seeing your question on offshore drilling and offshore wind, and we don't have a complete answer for you here. So the Congressman's office is going to follow up with you, Court in Palos Verdes, when they can assemble a complete answer and make sure they get you a correct answer to your question. So expect the Congressman's office to follow up with you offline in the next couple of days and get you an answer to your question. We're going to go next to Mike in Manhattan Beach. Mike, welcome to the call and thank you.
Hello. First of all, Congressman, I think you're doing a great job. But it looks like there's no carbon tax in the Inflation Reduction Act, which disappointed me. It would have been fairer than the sort of picking winners and losers, which happened. How did the carbon tax get ruled out?
I have a pretty simple answer to that. As you may know, we have a Senate that's exactly split 50-50, and there simply weren't 50 votes plus the vice president for a carbon tax. That's sort of the basic answer. Now, this November, there is national elections again, and certainly the people could decide to elect more Democratic U.S. senators. If the filibuster were to be removed, then you could do a carbon tax.
Got it. Makes sense. Thank you, Congressman. And thank you, Mike, for being a part of our forum. We'll get the poll results from our last poll in just a moment here. Let's get our next question in first from Brenda in Redondo Beach. Brenda, you're live. Go ahead.
Yes, one of the options in the first poll talked about energy injustice. I was wondering if someone, or energy justice, could someone explain what that means?
Sure, happy about that. It's and I'm sorry if it didn't come across clearly. It's not called energy justice. It's called environmental justice. So the issue is, for example, if you cite a whole bunch of polluting factories only in certain neighborhoods, that would be unjust, right? And if you look at the history and pattern of where there's been more pollution, you've seen a disproportionate impact, unfortunately, on a number of minority communities. That's basically what has happened in our history. And so we now have to take steps to try to correct that. I know California has also been working on that issue, and Secretary Colford, if you want to talk about that as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, I'm really proud that both California and the federal government, through this Inflation Reduction Act, are making targeted investments in communities that have been burdened by this environmental pollution. In California, we have something called EnviroScreen that really looks across our state, and it identifies those neighborhoods, those communities that have the worst environmental conditions, whether it's the quality of air, the quality of water, toxic contamination from factories. And there are some communities that are really hard hit by these environmental burdens. And so we in California, most of our programs are spending a significant portion, sometimes upwards of 40-50%, on these very targeted communities. And in the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a new program specifically targeting improvements in cleaning up communities that have been burdened by these environmental pollution, or what we would know as environmental injustice. So I think we're excited that these investments will be spent across the country in all communities, but also with a focused attention on where pollution impacts have been most damaging to people and their communities.
All right. Thank you again. Appreciate you taking that question on. Thank you, Brenda, for reaching out. We've got the results of our last survey question. We asked you what provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act that focuses on cutting energy costs most excites you. We asked you that question recently, and looks like 39% of you voted for electric vehicle tax credits for new and used purchases. And then 38% of you said rooftop solar panel tax credits, and 23% said direct consumer rebates for energy efficient and electric appliances. And we'll go ahead and run our third and final survey question. We've got about less than 20 minutes left here. If we don't answer your question by the end of the forum, you can leave a voicemail message for Congressman Lieu's office, and he'll be able to follow up with you in the next couple of days. We'll have his office follow up. So if you don't get your question answered, stay on the end and leave a voicemail message. Our next survey for you is this: do the tax credits of up to $7,500 for new and $4,000 for used electric vehicle purchases make you more inclined to consider buying an electric vehicle? Press 1 for yes and press 2 for no. So again, do the tax credits of up to $7,500 for new and $4,000 for used electric vehicle purchases make you more inclined to consider buying an electric vehicle? Press 1 for yes and 2 for no. Appreciate that feedback. We'll have the results of that in just a moment. We're going to go next to Charlie from Santa Monica, who's asked me to read their question. Question is, I'm worried about fire seasons getting worse and worse here. How is the state and federal government making sure we're prepared to fight them? That's a great question. It is that season, unfortunately, Charlie. So thank you so much. Congressman, can you take this on for Charlie in Santa Monica?
Sure, and then I'll have Secretary Crowford answer as well. Before I address that question, I do want to, while Secretary Crowford is here, thank the Newsom administration and the California State Legislature for their historic, groundbreaking policy to have basically no gas vehicles by 2035. When the fifth largest economy in the world does that, that's an amazing message to send. It's leadership by California again, and I think that's really going to cause other jurisdictions, other countries, other states to take similar action. So thank you for doing that. In terms of fire season, unfortunately, climate change has made wildfires worse. Not only are we experiencing more fuel in terms of dry trees and dry leaves and other matter that can combust very easily, but we also have less rainfall where we need it. It is a very toxic combination, and it's affecting not just California, but also other states, particularly in the West. So it's going to require an effort of both the state and the federal government, as well as local jurisdictions, to really tackle wildfires. There's separate legislation that also deals specifically with firefighter pay who go fight these wildfires. So we've increased some of that pay, and we've also recently passed legislation in the House of Representatives to address wildfires. And then in terms of what California is doing, I will have Secretary Crowford answer that question.
Yeah, thanks. So, this threat of catastrophic wildfire, as the Congressman said, and we all know, has gotten worse in recent years, fueled by these hotter temperatures. Now, the good news is, in response, we are spending more money than ever on two fronts. One is to improve the response capacity of CAL FIRE and local fire agencies. So CAL FIRE actually has received hundreds of millions of dollars of improvements in recent years that are paying off right now. This means more helicopters, more planes, more boots on the ground to keep the fires that do start really small. This summer we've been really fortunate. Year to date, about 1/10 of the amount of acres burned compared to last year. And a lot of that is obviously Mother Nature, which we don't control. But there are many occasions where more helicopters in the air, more personnel that we've been able to fund have gotten quickly to fires and kept them small. And that's really important. So the first front is wildfire response. The second front is proactive upfront actions that we're taking before wildfires ever start. So this is funding, for example, defensible space around homes or these fuel breaks around communities in Southern California that will slow down a wildfire from entering into a community and allow firefighters to make a stand. And in some cases, thinning out the vegetation, whether it's a forest or what we call chaparral, which are sort of the bush-like habitat of a lot of areas of Southern California. And between last year and this year, we're spending $3 billion on those projects. And there are hundreds, actually well over 1,000 projects that are underway to proactively protect against wildfire risk. So, I know that wildfire risk is scary to a lot of people, depending on where you live. And the smoke impacts are impactful almost regardless of where you live in California. but know that California agencies and our partnerships, our funding from our federal government is enabling us to do more than ever to limit wildfire risk. I won't be unrealistic that we're going to continue to have this risk moving forward, but our goal is if we over year continue to build our wildfire response while doing more proactive projects, we will bring under control this wildfire phenomenon. California will always have wildfires. That's part of our sort of a natural cycle, but we're trying to remove the very unnatural phenomenon of these small wildfires becoming huge and catastrophic. And that's really our focus, and that's where we're making progress.
Thank you so much, Secretary Crowfoot. My understanding is you have to jump off the call, but I do want to thank you so much for your time today and your expertise and your leadership across California. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. And I got to say, I mean, honestly, I'm more optimistic than I've ever been on this topic of climate change, thanks to your leadership, the leadership of Congress. And I can't overestimate, the impact of this Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, this is giving us a shot for America to lead on combating climate change. It's going to make a difference in California. It's going to certainly make a difference in Southern California and your district. And I'm just really quite optimistic and energized thanks to the leadership that we've seen in D.C. recently. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Secretary Crowfoot, and thank you again for being with us, folks. We've got very little time left in our forum. I want to review our survey questions for you. So the most recent one we asked you is, do the tax credits of up to $7,500 for new and $4,000 for used electric vehicle purchases make you more inclined to consider buying an electric vehicle? 73% of you said yes, 27% said no. So just to review all of our results again, we asked what's the most important issue in addressing the climate crisis. 41% said pollution reduction. That was the top one. We asked you which aspect of the Inflation Reduction Act focused on cutting energy costs most excites you. 39% said it was electric vehicle tax for new and used EV purchases. And then finally, 73% of you said that tax credit was going to make you more likely to buy an electric vehicle. Congressman, any thoughts on that before we start wrapping up our forum here? Any thoughts on the results of those polls?
First of all, it's very helpful for me to hear the results of the polls, and it affects how we look at issues and different legislation. So I do want to thank the people for participating. And also, it's pretty clear to me that people do care about the environment and want to see what we can do to tackle climate change.
Thanks so much. All right. Congressman, we have very little time left, but I did want to mention, folks, if you wanted to give us your email address real quick to get email updates from Congressman Lieu, you can do that by pressing 7 on your phone. So press 7 real quick here, speak to an operator, give them your email address if you would like to get email updates from the Congressman's office. And if you need to reach out to his office and get constituent assistance, you can do that by calling the LA office at 323-651-1040 or going to lieu.house.gov, or you can stay on the line at the end of our forum here in just a couple minutes, and you can leave a voicemail message with your name, your phone number, whatever your question or concern is, and the Congressman's office will follow back up with you as soon as they can. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Congressman Lieu to start wrapping us up.
Okay. I want to thank everyone for participating, and when you look at laws like the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act, they are significant laws that have changed how we're going to be in the future in terms of both climate change as well as the number of jobs that we created. And when I say that Democrats put people over politics, it's simply a descriptive fact because both the Inflation Reduction Act and the American Rescue Plan were passed solely with Democratic votes. Every Republican voted no. So that's just simply a fact. And if you look at these two laws, they have done amazing things and will continue to do amazing things for America and for our country. At the same time, we've also worked on a bipartisan basis to pass laws such as the bipartisan infrastructure law that's going to rebuild roads, bridges, and highways, and get lead out of our water and put broadband everywhere. So we do have a lot of accomplishments in this Congress as well as under the Biden administration. And I look forward to continue working with all of you as we make Southern California and America an even better place to live, work, and play.
Thank you again, Congressman. Appreciate you. Thank you again to Secretary Crowfoot, and thanks to everybody from California's 33rd Congressional District for joining us tonight. If you still need assistance from the Congressman's office, something went unanswered for you, stay on the line, leave a voicemail message. Make sure if you need the Congressman's office to reach back out to you, leave your name and your phone number in addition to your message with whatever you need assistance with.